So hello and welcome back to another video. Now in this series we are going to be doing hybrids first, as they were one of the technologies that came out the first. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little guide to what we're going to be doing in this video, which will be based on a timeline, which I'll show here. And then really quickly we're going to kind of glance over it. I'm going to say a few words about each thing, and then we're going to go into each thing in detail so you can get kind of the full story of hybrids and how they came to be. So with that, let's get into it. So with that, let's get into the timeline. Now, in the year 1900, Ferdinand Porsche came out with the first ever hybrid concept. It wasn't a hybrid as we really know it today. It was more just sort of an electric car and a regular gas engine kind of working together. So it is a hybrid, but not how we would see them today. In 1993, the Bush-Gore administration, George H.W. Bush, came out with the PNGV partnership, which was a partnership with the CEOs of Ford, Daimler-Benz, and of course General Motors, and they were aimed to come up with a new generation of electric car, but before they could do anything, they had been beat by Toyota, who in 1993 started working on the first mass-producible hybrid. In 1997, they came out with the Toyota Prius, which was a small sedan, which was the first ever mass-produced hybrid, at least here in the United States. Well, everywhere it was. In 1999, the Honda Insight was released, the second ever mass-producible hybrid. In 2005, the first ever luxury hybrid came out, which was the Lexus RX 400h. 350h? I don't know. And then in 2006, Toyota came out with the Camry hybrid. In 2007, Nissan came out with the Altima hybrid. And then in 2010, as a result of that 17-year-long partnership, Chevrolet finally came out with the Volt, which was a weird little plug-in hybrid, sort of. And then in 2015, Toyota came out with the RAV4 hybrid, which is very popular today. So these are going to be the subjects that we're going to start talking about. So let's get into section 2. Yippee! So with that, it's time to get into the first hybrid car as we know it. Now, this wasn't a modern-day hybrid with all the complex batteries and generators. No, it was a simple car. Now, when I say simple, I don't mean it just had like an engine and a hybrid system. In fact, Porsche himself, this isn't the company, Porsche, had designed an electric car before. This car had the way that they describe it was a combustion engine that powered a generator that charged the wheels. I don't. I'm guessing it was what they call like a range extender, where the engine charged the generator, which would power a motor, which would then spin the wheels. So it was more like a range extended hybrid. So not the hybrid that we have today, where the motor can like control the wheels and do all that stuff, but it was still a very, very neat invention. And Ferdinand Porsche would go on to design many other cars. He also, in fact, designed the Volkswagen Beetle. So yeah, this car will definitely go down in history as the first ever hybrid car. I mean, it was very creative to think of, and people would definitely go back to that idea in the future, but of course, improve upon it and make that original design into what we have today with all the complex, fancy generator and regenerative braking. So with that section done, it's time to get into section 3 or 4. I can't remember. Now it's time to talk about the Clean Car Initiative of 1993. Now, this was done under the Bush and, of course, his Vice President Gore administration. The goal of this was to produce great cars. Here are some remarks of his when announcing this program, if you'd like to read them. But the goal was to take all of these car manufacturers, you know, the Chrysler ones, Daimler, Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors, and to give them a sort of guidelines which they had to play by. If you're curious as to what those guidelines were, I've got them pulled up here. And they had to make a car with these exact guidelines, and they had to have a decent price. It had to be 3 times more fuel efficient. It had to have 80 miles per gallon. It had to have the same performance, size, cost, emissions, and safety as existing vehicles. Now let's talk a little bit about Gore. Gore was one of the first, Al Gore, the vice president, was one of the first ever politicians, not the first, but one of the first, to really use the climate crisis as sort of a political ploy, and not in a negative way. See, if you think about it, this plan was really perfect. First of all, they got to shed light on what was, to them, a pressing issue, which was the climate crisis. It depends from person to person. And with that, they got to strengthen the United States economy by involving the auto industry in their plans, and they got new technology that would put them ahead of other foreign car industry, of other foreign car companies and industries. So it was really an ingenious plan, and Al Gore helped a lot with this plan, as, again, like I mentioned, he was one of the first ever politicians to really use the climate crisis to his advantage when making legislation and when speaking. So, yeah, that's pretty neat, I guess. Now it's time to move on to our favorite player, the Prius. So now it's time to start talking about the Toyota G21 concept. But before I get into that, I want to read an excerpt from the Global Toyota website celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Prius. An excerpt from an interview that they did with a person who worked on the Prius for a very, very extensive amount of time. So I will begin reading that now. It all started with the G21 project. It was the summer of 1993. E.G. Toyota, honorary chairman of the time, urged us to start thinking about a new vision for cars, one for the medium long term that would prepare us for the 21st century. That's when we started the first study that would lead us to the Prius. Chairman Skichiro Toyota, wow, did I butcher that, agreed with the plan and developed a new vision for cars and lent his support. The initial study commenced in September under the codename G21. G stood for Globe and 21 for the 21st century, a fitting moniker for a project whose main aim was to conceive a car for the new century. The project team consisted of 10 engineers and designers working off a blank slate on research for the next generation mass production passenger car. Challenges One of the initial challenges was how to define this vague concept of a car for the 21st century. We couldn't rely on conventional methods since we couldn't adopt a market-oriented approach. We had to propose a whole new technology. By the end of 1993, the project team had completed an initial report outlining the concept for a 21st century car. It was compact but roomy, with a long wheelbase and a fuel efficiency of 20 kilometers per liter. With the report approved, the initial project team disbanded. And this glorious beast was what they came up with. Remember, this is 1995. This is a radical new design. The original Prius gave birth to a lot of the modern design things we see today. I mean, look at the cars of the time and how radically different they are. The Toyota Prius maximized the interior cabin room, cut the frunk, and cut the trunk. They also allowed for big, gigantic windows and small little pillars with better high quality materials. So instead of having big, thick tin pillars, you had smaller pillars that were very, very strong to hold up the car in case of an accident, and big windows for great visibility. You also had plastic cladding so that if you got in a car accident, hit another car, or you were worried about rock chips, it wouldn't rock chip or damage your paint as would happen to a normal car. And when we move in the interior, we can really see what a difference that cutting the trunk and cutting the frunk led to this. I mean, look at it. That is plenty of space, especially for 1993. This had similar space to a Cadillac, and yet it was the size of the outgoing Corolla, or ish. When we look at the interior, we can see they were dreaming big. This was 1993. CRTs didn't become incredibly popular. I mean, LCDs didn't become incredibly popular in household families until like 2007, and yet this one had not one, but two LCDs. They had a color display, and then they had your usual digital gauge cluster screen. And we can see the colors wildly different two-tone, and we can see even a little hint of that Lexus drive system where you put your hand down and you control it. It had a joystick, for Christ's sake. And again, when you compare it to the cars at the time, it was a vastly revolutionary, brand new design that would really give birth to the modern day car industry itself and what cars look like now. The Prius also gave birth to the modern day hybrid system. As we can see here, it's got a gas tank, it's got a battery, it's got a fill up station, and it's got, your hybrid synergy drive system, or as it was called back then, the Toyota hybrid drive system. We can see, everything's kind of similar. A lot of them share cables and stuff. Now, this first generation of the Toyota hybrid system, as it looked, had some issues. It was prone to overheating. They really needed to cool it down. The batteries would overheat. They needed extra ventilation, which, believe it or not, is why they had that little side, if you can see right next to the spoiler on the back, was actually to vent the battery. This first system, this is the top of it. This is actually, I believe, the BMS system, the thing that managed all the stuff that would go on top of the transmission, which sat next to the engine, as you can see it here. Um, it was riddled with issues. They came out with other generations like this, with the Toyota G4 engine and the Toyota EMS, the Energy Management System, until they finally settled upon what we know today as the Toyota Hybrid Synergy Drive System. And believe it or not, they still use this in modern day cars. If I bought a brand new 2024 Toyota Prius, it wouldn't be that different from maybe a 2004 Toyota Prius, except some slight changes with the engine and transmission. They still use the system today, and it's still one of the best. When we compare it to Honda's HSD, I mean, this is the HSD. When we compare it to Honda's, what was it called? The Honda Integrated Drive. The Integrated Drive can't drive the car, and yet the hybrid system can. And also, the hybrid system can charge itself, which not a lot of other hybrid electric vehicles, which can run solely on electricity, can. So this is the car that we wanted, right? I already talked about all the features, why it was so revolutionary. Now you're probably expecting them to have to cut most things down for production, which they did have to do. But they didn't cut the shape. They just cut the lug nuts and a few other design aspects, which you'll be able to see now when I put the new one on screen. Now we can see it's still a compact hatchback, but it's a lot less bubbly and it is monotone. There is not multiple different colors or paneling going on here, but it was still a very nice car. It had four lug nuts, and believe it or not, it still, exclusively on the driver's side, had its goofy little vent. You can't see it in any of these photos, but you get the general idea and shape. It wasn't as bubbly as the one that they were hoping to come out, and in my, you know, mind, it isn't as pretty, but it did get fantastic gas mileage, around 43 miles if you drove it gently. And it was, of course, also, as you would expect from Toyota, revolutionary for the time. When we move into the interior, we can see did end up getting that touchscreen, which was revolutionary. And also, I know I'm saying it's revolutionary a lot, but this is true car history being made here, guys. If you zoom in on your screens, you can actually see that it had a tape deck. This was probably one of the only cars ever in existence to have a tape deck and a touchscreen, but no CD player. I mean, seriously, this is how revolutionary this was. This is one of the first ever cars to ship with a touchscreen. We can see, like the modern Prius, it also does have that center mounted gauge cluster. And guys, they're still out there. There are still Toyota Priuses being daily driven by people because that's what they're meant to do. These cars are very reliable. One of them, I believe, even has 400,000 miles on the clock with its original battery. Now, it doesn't get as good of gas mileage, but, if you see one of these driving around, you might just want to pick one up. They're very good cars, they're very reliable, and they've got that Toyota reliability. Toyota is a company that would never release something unless it was finished. They would never release something half-baked, and that is especially true with the Toyota Prius. This brand new car that could do everything. If GM came out with a similar car, I'm sure it'd have a fire risk or something like that. Meanwhile, the Toyota Prius had merely no issues. It did have a few updates along the years, as we know. It's had several generations today. I believe it's up to 5 or 6 now, and people love it. It is one of the best selling, if not, I think it's the best selling hybrid ever, or at least of 2015 or 2010, around there. And believe it or not, soon this would actually end up giving Toyota over 1 million hybrid car sales. Now, it's that time in the video where we officially have to start talking about what I like to call, at least with the first generation, the green booger. You'll see why in a second. Enjoy the random B-roll in the background. But this was the Honda Insight, the second ever hybrid car. Yeah, you may notice it's very different from the Toyota Prius. So the Toyota Prius was supposed to be the new car of the 21st century, right? New, basic, boring, your average, normal, just fine sedan. Like you would see it in a grocery store, you'd be like, oh, that's fine. The Honda Insight was designed for maximum efficiency, which gave it this cute but unfortunate look. It was very triangular, being very wide at the front, like a teardrop. That was the design. It had, believe it or not, before the Prius, the first ever glass hatch, as you can see in the back, not the first ever in the car industry, but you can see on a hybrid, as the Prius would adopt this later in its later generations. And of course, it only sat two, which was a big disadvantage from the Insight to the Prius. Another interesting thing that happened around this time was Honda thought that it was the only one working on a hybrid at the time. it knew that Toyota was doing something, but they didn't really know what. So Honda was planning to come up with this. They had all this marketing. They came up with it, and then they were like, the Prius, and the Prius came out before them, and they were all upset about it. But they were the first in the United States. But that's why a lot of people say that, oh, the Insight was first. Technically, it was in the United States as it came out in 1991, and the Prius came out in 2000. But the Prius sold elsewhere in from 1997 and onwards. So the Prius is the first. The Honda Insight is just the first American one, and it had a 1 liter 3 cylinder gasoline engine and an electric motor. Now it's time for us to start talking about IMA. And there's something crucial that you need to know before we get into this. And that is that Toyota's previously mentioned hybrid synergy drive system was way astoundingly better than Honda's integrated motor assist. With the Honda integrated motor assist, the only point of the electric motor wasn't to drive the car or to do anything of that sort. It was bonded permanently to the engine, and it would just take some slack off the engine by dealing with the torque stuff, right? Because that's what electric motors are at. You can see it here. It is permanently bonded to the actual engine. This is it without the cover off. You'll be able to see it with the cover on in a minute, which meant the electric drive system could not actually drive the car. It wasn't as efficient as, well, it was more efficient than the Prius because of its weird shape. But if the IMA system was in a Toyota Prius, it would be much, much, much less efficient than the Toyota hybrid synergy drive system because IMA was just integrated motor assist. Meanwhile, the Toyota HSD, the hybrid synergy drive system, either or the engine, the electric motor, or in Synergy, HSD, hybrid synergy drive, they could work together. In IMA, they were permanently bonded, working together with a small little battery to help out occasionally sometimes. So the two definitely were not equal. Another thing, as we move into the interior, it's a stick shift. Yeah, because you can't drive the electric motor individually from the motor, it has a normal transmission. And not just a normal transmission, but in typical 90s fashion, it has a stick shift in a hybrid and a weird, goofy digital gauge cluster. This was actually one of the interiors that helped inspire the weirder, older Honda interiors. Because after they lost with the Insight and they found out that the Toyota Prius obviously was way more successful than the Insight because I can't go out and buy an Insight. I'm going to make a video on that later, but it did help inspire some of the more goofy Honda interiors. So now it's time to move on again to the first ever luxury hybrid. So now it's time to talk about the first ever luxury hybrid. Now, what company do you think this was made by? Acura, General Motors, Lexus? Pause the video. What do you think it will be? Write it down in the comments. Okay, now it's time to reveal it. It was Lexus with the Lexus RX 400H, the first ever luxury hybrid. Now, you may be thinking, why would this be coming out now in 2005 when this thing came out instead of earlier? I mean, the Prius technology has been around since the 90s. Well, that's because this car does not have a wimpy 4 cylinder, right? Or even a 3 cylinder like the Insight. It has a V6. That's right. What took Toyota so long with that 5 or 6 years was how to figure out a V6 hybrid. And they did. They figured out how to match the generator with the engine. They figured out everything. And in the end, it resulted in, I believe, the first ever hybrid SUV and officially the first ever hybrid luxury vehicle, which is the wonderful Lexus RX. Now, these are great deals today. A lot of people are still driving them, especially the non-hybrid variants, and these have been proven to be just as reliable as the Toyota Prius. And they also, which is just incredibly neat, had all-wheel drive, where instead of just having, the wimpy system where you have the front motor and the rear motor, there's actually like a thing that carries the engine power from the front to the rear. If you read up on it, it's really weird. The transmission points backwards instead of towards the side. And here's some details of it. It was a very weird system design, but in the end, they got it done. It wasn't Mercedes, wasn't anyone. No, it was in-house Lexus, not Honda. And around this time, Honda was still very upset about the Insight and about the Prius beating them, so they were busy making their Civic hybrid and crying over their loss. But now it's officially time to talk about everyone's favorite car and everyone's dad's favorite car, the Camry. So now we're at kind of the era where the war is over. Honda's done. Honda's just kind of given up. They're just kind of fighting with their Civic. Now there's not a whole lot to do. So, we might as well mention some of the other hybrid cars. The Toyota Camry hybrid was one of them. This was Toyota's second attempt to put a hybrid drivetrain in a car that wasn't hybrid. The first one, of course, being the Lexus RX that we've mentioned previously. And it's normal. It is a completely normal car. I mean, a lot of people like it. What helped its sales originally, which helped it eventually overtake the Prius in sales, especially with the sixth generation being the first generation, was the sixth generation had a lot of oil burning problems. So in the aftermarket market, once people knew about those issues and the recalls for the car, they went with the hybrid because it didn't really have those issues because it had the same engine and a similar drivetrain as the Toyota Prius. There are a bunch of other weird hybrid cars that we're going to go over at the end, but this was one of the more influential ones as it helped Toyota non-Prius hybrids overtake the Prius. The interior was pretty decent. I mean, it had navigation, touchscreen, it had dual zone climate control, you even got your own little multi-information display in your gauge cluster. But overall, there wasn't a whole lot to say about it because, again, it was your and your dad's favorite car. You can get Burger King, you can have sausage roll farts in the front seat, and the car will take it. It's a fine car. Also, just a little Toyota hybrid synergy drive system fun fact for you here. It was actually used in the Mercury Mariner hybrid, which is something you would never expect, but I just figured I'd throw that in there. So now we're getting into the Ultima hybrid, and then at the end, we're just going to do all the other random hybrids after, of course, the RAV4 hybrid. So, Now we're on to another random hybrid car that people don't often remember. This one actually used the Toyota Hybrid Synergy Drive system and a lot of Camry parts. It did actually use one of their crappy, awful Nissan engines, so they're awful, and I wouldn't really buy one. I would just buy a Camry hybrid. But I figured I'd mention that because apparently whenever I ask hybrid people in the hybrid spaces if they remember this car, they say no. Like, it's like, I don't know. It's like once you see it, you forget it. It just looks like a normal Ultima, like they didn't try and greenwash it and put like a bunch of hybrid stickers on it. But it used Toyota's hybrid synergy drive system, and I figured it was worth mentioning considering a lot of people don't really think about it or consider it, which they really shouldn't, when buying or reading into the history of hybrid cars, which is, of course, hopefully what this video is about, what I'm intentioning it to be about. Who knows? I could edit the entire thing and finish it, and it could be about gummy bears for all I know. So next up on the list, we have the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, one of my favorite hybrids, and if I were to buy a hybrid, well, another hybrid, considering I own two of them, the second generation Prius and the third generation, I'd buy this one. It has all-wheel drive. Oftentimes you can find them fairly cheap on the used market. They're very good, nice, reliable cars. The interior is especially very nice, if I do say so myself, considering one of my family members owned one of these and I was thinking about buying it. I really liked it when I drove it. It was a non-hybrid version, but what the hell. But yeah, they're great cars. I figured like I'd mention it because this was one of the first ever hybrid SUVs that didn't come with a luxury price tag or was just flat out a luxurious car. So this is the last thing we're going to talk about today. So yay, I'm free. Well, now it's time for my closing and final thoughts. Now, there's not a whole lot to say. Hybrids are fantastic vehicles, originally pioneered by the Toyota, you know, the car company Toyota, in the late 1990s as they started working on the Toyota Prius, the first hybrid car, or at least the first mass-produced hybrid car in 1993. There have been several other hybrids since then, and most of the hybrids from like 2000 from like 2015 that were not Hondas mostly use the hybrid synergy drive system. There are some weird GM vehicles, GM Yukon, Chevrolet Tahoe that use the hybrid, not the hybrid synergy drive system, but are hybrids that are kind of weird. So you can look into those if you want. But yeah, hybrids overall are a very neat idea. They're a great car. They offer great gas mileage and good performance with a reasonable price tag, especially when bought used. And there's not much else to say. So let me know if you liked this video in the comments. Let me know if I got anything wrong. I tried to do my research. I crossed my I's and dotted my T's. I'm making this in a month in advance. You're probably seeing this this is February 10th right now. So a few months from now, unless I get eager and just start posting randomly, which I do occasionally, and then I don't post for a long time because I have to build up my content library again. But yeah, I hope you like this video, and yeah, I'm just gonna kind of let the video segue out with this wonderful, lovely B-roll footage of this, if you want to buy this car, a 2013 Honda Insight EX. So